Hey, welcome to our channel. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss our latest content.
Clara and I had been enduring a silent marriage. That's the only way to describe it. It wasn't a loud, crashing plates kind of end. There were no acknowledged affairs, no screaming matches that the neighbors could gossip about. There was just a growing disconnection, a quiet, creeping frost that had settled over the 10 years we'd shared, leaving us as two strangers existing in parallel worlds, all within the same four walls. We still took the annual trips. They were a formality, I think, a relic from a time when we genuinely believed a change of scenery could fix what was broken in the architecture of our lives. An attempt to reconnect two ends of a wire that had long since been severed. This year was supposed to be Italy, a promise made at the conclusion of last year's tense, quiet trip to Portugal. Next year, Italy, she had said, a rare flicker of something that looked like excitement in her eyes. And for a while, I let myself believe in it. I anticipated the cobblestone streets, the shared glasses of Chianti, the possibility that the warmth of the Tuscan sun might just thaw the ice between us. But just days before our departure, the call came. It was from headquarters. An unexpected, unavoidable mission in Atlanta. Nextback, the company I'd poured a decade of my life into, was on the verge of losing a colossal client in the food sector, Foodstream Plus, and I was the one they needed to send. I had to present the strategic project that would, hopefully, save the multi-million-dollar contract. It was a genuine promotion opportunity, the kind you work your entire career for. I found Clara in the living room, scrolling through her phone, the blue light illuminating a face I once knew better than my own. I explained everything. The urgency, the client, the weight of the responsibility. I laid it all out, hoping for something, support, understanding, perhaps a suggestion to reschedule our trip. She didn't offer any of that. Clara listened in silence, her thumb never ceasing its rhythmic swipe across the screen. When I finished, she slowly crossed her arms, a gesture that was both a shield and a wall. And then, without looking up from her phone, she replied, "Then go." Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "I'm going too. Everything is already booked." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and cold. I stood there, staring at the face of the woman I had shared my life with, trying to understand if there was still anything left behind those eyes. Anything at all. She left the room without another word, her phone still held in front of her like a talisman. It was as if that conversation had ended even before it began. And maybe it really had. I flew to Atlanta the next morning with my mind split in two. One half consumed by responsibility, the numbers and projections of my project, and the other half lost in a thick, unsettling fog of uneasiness. Atlanta was a blur of fluorescent lights and pressurized conference rooms. My team was waiting. We dove into 3 intense days of meetings, presentations, and strategic warfare. The project I was defending was a complete reformulation of packaging, one focused on sustainability and reducing logistical costs. It was smart, it was efficient, and it was our last shot. If I could convince the executives, if I could make them see the long-term value, Nextback wouldn't just retain the contract with Foodstream Plus. It would open doors in their other divisions. It was a legacy project, so I gave it my all. I slept little, subsisting on stale hotel, coffee, and adrenaline. I reviewed every piece of data, anticipated every possible question, and led my team with a confidence I didn't entirely feel inside. By the end of the second day, it was over. The director of Foodstream, a stern man named Henderson, shook my hand. His grip was firm. "That's it, Elias," he said, a rare smile cracking his weathered face. "We're maintaining the partnership. You did good work." Relief. It washed over me like a tidal wave, a deep, bone-weary relief. We had done it. I should have been happy, elated, even. But when I returned to the sterile quiet of my hotel room, the feeling evaporated. I sat on the edge of the king-sized bed and stared at my reflection in the dark television screen. A man in a wrinkled suit. A successful man. A lonely man. The feeling of victory was cloudy, muted. Something was missing. No, someone was missing. Someone to share it with. It was that same night that the photograph arrived. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from an old friend, Liam, who was also traveling in Europe. The text was casual. "Man, you're missing out. Europe is amazing. Saw someone you know in Rome." And then the image loaded. My breath caught in my throat. It was Clara. She was sitting at an outdoor restaurant, a glass of red wine in her hand. She was laughing, a genuine, unguarded laugh, the kind I hadn't seen directed at me in years. She wore a simple summer dress, and the soft light of the Roman evening made her look happy. And next to her was a man. He had a short beard and was wearing a crisp dress shirt. He was leaning in close, his expression mirroring her joy. Marcus, the same teacher from the school where she worked. The same one I had caught her having questionable, late-night text conversations with months earlier. She had sworn it was just friendship, that I was exaggerating, overreacting. But that image, it left no room for doubt. The two of them were there, so comfortable, so intimately close, that only someone actively choosing to be deceived would believe it was innocent. I looked at the screen for minutes. The low, steady hum of the hotel air conditioner was the only thing filling the suffocating silence of the room. My heart wasn't pounding. It wasn't racing. It just felt heavy, a dead weight in my chest. I thought about calling her, writing a scathing text, confronting her across thousands of miles of ocean. But at the same time, I felt an overwhelming sense of futility. It wasn't worth it. In that moment, staring at that digital betrayal, I understood that something had been broken for a very, very long time. And the saddest part, the part that truly hollowed me out, was that it didn't catch me by surprise. That photograph didn't shatter my world. It just confirmed what I had been ignoring for far too long. I returned home 5 days later. The trip back was a haze. I finalized the report, presented the successful results to the board, and received formal praise for the negotiation. My boss even mentioned a promotion, a significant one. I thanked him, my voice steady, my expression firm on the outside, but inside, I felt like a ruin. I walked through our front door with a suitcase in one hand and that unbearable weight in my chest. Clara was there, on the couch, exactly where I'd left her. Her hair was tied back, a laptop perched on her lap, her fingers tapping away at the keyboard as if nothing had happened, as if the world hadn't tilted on its axis. She looked up at me, a small, practiced smile touching her lips. It didn't reach her eyes. "Hi," she said, her voice even. "How was it there?" "Good," I answered. The word felt like sawdust in my mouth. There was no mention of the client, no hint of curiosity about the achievement, the effort I had poured in, no questions about Atlanta. She didn't seem curious. She didn't seem guilty, either, just indifferent. She said her trip was great, that Rome was wonderful, that she needed it. She described the Colosseum and the fountains, her voice a detached, automatic monotone, like someone recounting a documentary they'd half-watched. She didn't mention Marcus. She didn't even try to hide the coldness with which she described those days away. I watched her while she spoke. I studied her face, searching for a sign, a flicker of remorse, a hint of the truth. But there was nothing. Her voice seemed rehearsed, like someone recounting a story experienced with another person, but trying to pretend it was a solo journey. I waited. I let the silence stretch after she finished, giving her one last chance to say something real. But nothing came. She just went back to her laptop, and in that simple, dismissive gesture, I understood. The end had already happened. We were just living in the wreckage. What remained was the formality of two strangers sharing a roof out of inertia. I went upstairs. I took a long, hot shower, letting the water drum against my back, trying to wash away the grime of the last week, the last years. I looked at my face in the steamed-up mirror. The man looking back at me was exhausted, defeated, and in that moment, I made a decision. I would never again put my peace second for someone who didn't even show interest in my achievements. The betrayal wasn't just in the photo. It was in the absence of questions, in the lack of empathy, in the way she pretended everything was fine. The biggest pain wasn't her dinner in Rome. It was returning home with an exhausted soul and realizing that, for her, it didn't matter if I had come back or stayed there. I walked back downstairs, my steps firm on the wooden staircase. She was still on the couch, immersed in her screen. She glanced at me quickly, then her eyes darted back to her laptop as if I were nothing more than a passing shadow. I didn't beat around the bush. "Why was Marcus with you in Italy?" The words cut through the silence. She froze. Her hands became motionless over the keyboard. Her whole body went rigid. "What? What do you mean?" she stammered, trying to buy time. "You know exactly what I mean," I said, my voice low but unwavering. "Why was he there? Why did you spend days with him and not tell me? Was that why you preferred to go alone? Was everything already arranged?" She took a deep, shaky breath and closed the laptop. Slowly, carefully, as if that simple act could protect her from the truth that was about to come out. I met him by chance," she replied, her voice trembling. "I didn't even know he was going to be in Italy." I took a step forward, my eyes locked on hers. "By chance?" I said, the disbelief sharp in my voice. "You work together. You talk all day. And you want me to believe that by chance he showed up in Rome, on the same days, on the same route as you? Cut it out, Clara." She was silent for a moment. She ran a hand across her face, a gesture of pure frustration. Not at her actions, but at being caught. "You're overreacting," she snapped, her voice gaining a defensive edge. "You're being dramatic. This is why I didn't tell you. I knew you would react like this. Get jealous. Draw your own conclusions." "I saw a photo, Clara," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "The two of you laughing as if it were a second honeymoon. That's not jealousy. That's observation. And you didn't even have the decency to warn me." She looked away, unable to meet my gaze. A knot started forming in her throat. "You already know what's happened here, right?" I asked, my voice dropping, tired of the fight. "What?" she whispered. "Our marriage is over," I replied directly. "It's been over for a long time." Clara put her hands to her face. And she cried. But it wasn't a cry of surprise or shock. It was the cry of someone who had finally seen the consequences of their actions knocking at the door. "It's not like that, Elias," she sobbed. "When you said you wouldn't go because of work, I felt so abandoned. And then Marcus heard the conversation at work. He said that if I wanted, he could accompany me. I was going to be alone. And it just happened." I closed my eyes for a moment. It was worse than I had imagined. It wasn't chance. It was a choice. A cowardly, selfish choice. Without saying anything more, I turned around. I went back upstairs to the master bedroom, opened the suitcase that hadn't even been unpacked yet, and took out some clothes. I crossed the hallway and entered the guest room. I closed the door. I needed distance. I needed to sleep, not to rest, but to wake up in a new chapter. Inside me, there were no more doubts. Only the cold, hard confirmation that the end had begun long before that trip to Italy. And that night, sleeping in another room in my own house, I decided that from now on, nothing would ever be the same. I woke up before the alarm, my body tired, but my mind strangely determined. There was a clarity that hadn't been there before. The fog of years of denial had finally lifted. I dressed in the first clothes I saw and left the house quietly. I drove to a small cafe near the office, the kind of place I rarely went to. I ordered a strong, black coffee and a simple pastry. I sat there, looking at my phone. My hands were steady. I took a deep breath, opened my contacts, and searched for a number. A colleague had recommended him months ago, during a random conversation about messy divorces in the corporate world. A lawyer. At the time, I'd brushed it off. Now, it felt like a lifeline. It rang twice before a calm, professional voice answered. I spoke firmly. I explained the situation, outlining the main points without victimizing myself, but making it clear that there was nothing left to save. I said I wanted to file for divorce as soon as possible. The lawyer asked for some documents and agreed to prepare everything. After I hung up, I felt a strange mix of profound relief and crushing finality. It was like signing the closure of a long, exhausting chapter of my life. I went back home late that afternoon. Clara was in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove, the picture of domesticity. It was a scene that felt like a lie. I walked straight in and said, without any preamble, "I called a lawyer this morning. He's going to prepare the divorce papers." She turned, her face a mask of shock, the spoon still clutched in her hand. "What do you mean? You already spoke with a lawyer?" "I did," I replied, my voice dry. "And I want this to end quickly." She walked toward me, her voice choked with tears. "Elias, please. This is an exaggeration. We're hurt, we're confused, but we don't need to do it this way. Give me a chance to fix things." I crossed my arms. I looked directly at her, and for the first time in years, I felt no pull, no lingering attachment. Just a vast, empty space where love used to be. "I won't waste another second of my life on this, Clara. I'll stay here until the divorce is done. It's more practical. If you want to stay, stay. If you want to leave, go. If you want to run after Marcus, go ahead. Your life isn't my concern anymore." She started crying then. Deep, racking sobs. She tried to get closer, to touch my arm, but I moved away. It doesn't help anymore, I said, my voice final. You made your choices. Now, it's time to accept the consequences. Oh? The weeks that followed were mechanical. We were two strangers trapped inside the same house. We spoke only when absolutely necessary. We avoided eye contact. We slept in separate rooms with closed doors, and the silences between us were louder than any argument could ever be. The lawyer was quick. The process went smoothly. There were no judicial fights, no disputes over assets. We just wanted it to be over. We decided to sell the house and divide the amount. He rented a small, practical apartment near the Nextback headquarters. Clara, on the other hand, went back to her mother's house. She said she needed time, that she didn't know what to do with her life. I simply replied that I wished she found what she was searching for. In the same week that I signed the final divorce papers, I received a call from the board of directors. The manager position in our Munich branch was open. It was a major step up. They trusted me. They wanted me there. I answered in less than an hour. I accepted. I sold my car, canceled the lease on the recently rented apartment, and packed my bags. This time, when I left without looking back, without promises, without farewells, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was heading towards myself. Munich welcomed me with a cold, beautiful strangeness. Everything was different. The language was a tricky puzzle on my tongue in those first attempts. The supermarkets, the daily habits, the faces on the street, everything seemed foreign, including myself. In the first few days, I dove into work. I used it as an anesthetic, avoiding the echoing emptiness of my new apartment by immersing myself in spreadsheets, meetings, and tasks that forced me to forget. At night, I would walk the clean, quiet streets in silence, listening only to the sound of my own thoughts. On one of these aimless walks, I stopped in front of a small flower stand. An elderly man with a kind face and a halo of white hair was organizing the vases with a patient, practiced hand. On an impulse, I bought a small bouquet of simple, white flowers for the apartment. The man thanked me, and his German was slow and clear. He started a conversation. His name was Arthur. He was 72 years old, a widower for 2 decades. He spoke of his late wife as if she were still standing right beside him, telling stories with a sparkle in his eyes, and said that true love, it survives absence. I found myself going back to that flower stand almost every day. Not always for the flowers, but for the conversations, for the effortless wisdom of that old man who had already suffered, but who had never let himself harden. One day, Arthur said something that stuck with me. He looked at me, his eyes clear and perceptive, and said, "Starting over isn't forgetting, Elias, it's choosing to live again." Those words stayed with me. They became a quiet mantra. Months passed. The sharp edges of my grief began to soften, and then I met Lena. She was assigned as my new assistant. She was intelligent, discreet, and had a kindness that didn't invade, it just accompanied. She was German, but her English was flawless. There was a quiet strength about her, a sense of a past that had also been complicated. Neither of us was in a rush, but between meetings, shared coffees in the office kitchen, and sincere exchanges about work and life, something light began to grow. A bond that developed without pressure, without fear. It started with a simple question. "You seem a long way from home," she said one afternoon, handing me a cup of coffee. I admitted. "But sometimes, that's exactly where you need to be." She just nodded, a small, understanding smile on her face, and in that moment, I felt seen, truly seen, for the first time in a very long time. Together, step by step, without fantasies, without masks, just two people willing to discover if it was still possible to trust, to connect, to love after so much loss. We began to rebuild. Over time, I began to feel a part of Munich. I learned the routes, the best cafes, and some of my neighbors started to greet me by name. The city was no longer strange. It was becoming home. The connection with Lena grew just as naturally. Nothing was forced. We shared small routines. A trip to the weekend market. A relaxed dinner after a difficult day at work. A sincere conversation when one of us needed to unload. We didn't speak of our pasts with resentment, only with the quiet maturity of those who understood that life is made of cycles, and both of us, through very different paths, were ready to build something new, something clean, light, and genuine. 2 years later, on a common Sunday morning, Lena came out of the bathroom, her face pale, a small plastic stick trembling in her hand. She was pregnant. She told me, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't speak. I just held her hand, looked into her worried eyes, and smiled. A real, deep smile that came from a place I thought had been permanently damaged. In that silence, I felt it. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The arrival of the twins changed everything. Our modern apartment was replaced by a house on the outskirts of the city, complete with a small garden and rooms we painted in bright, hopeful colors. I made a conscious choice to reduce my workload, to delegate more, to be present for the first months of my daughter's lives. I wasn't going to make the same mistakes again. I began to admire the quiet delicacy of Lena as a mother, her infinite patience during sleepless nights, her meticulous attention to every small detail. On weekends, I still visited Arthur at his flower stand. Now, I brought the girls with me, bundled in their stroller. The old man's eyes would always light up when he saw them. He would smile, that wise, gentle smile of his, and say, "Life is generous to those who don't harden, my boy." And seeing me there, a man who had arrived in his city broken and alone, now with a family built on trust and gentle affection, it was proof that love begins again when you stop looking for the old and embrace the new with open arms. 9 years had passed since the end, and life was a world away from what it had been. Nextback, now with me as a senior director for the European division, decided to open its new global headquarters in Chicago. The proposal came as a direct invitation from the presidency. I would have total freedom to build the team and design the new strategic branch of the company. It was the pinnacle of a career. Lena and I talked calmly, sitting in our garden while our daughters, now 6 years old, chased butterflies. We discussed schools, adaptation, the distance from the quiet routine we had built. But at the end of the conversation, Lena took my hand and said, "If it's important to you, and if we do it together, then we'll do it." That was all I needed to hear. We returned to the United States in the early spring. When I stepped onto American soil, I felt a different posture in my own body. I wasn't the hurt, hollowed-out man who had fled the country years before. I was someone rebuilt. With scars, yes. They were healed, but still visible enough to remember where I came from. Chicago was busy, noisy, and full of a vibrant energy. I jumped into the new headquarters project with an enthusiasm I hadn't felt in years. I built my team carefully, relearned the American corporate rhythm, and even reunited with a few old colleagues. Some were surprised by my return. Others looked at me with a newfound admiration. I had become a reference in the company, a success story. One evening, after leaving the office late, I found myself driving, almost on autopilot, towards the old neighborhood where Clara and I used to live. The area had changed, but some details remained. The old newspaper kiosk, the corner park, the cafe on the avenue. I passed in front of our old house. A "For Sale" sign was planted in the front yard. I pulled the car over and just stood there for a few seconds, observing. I felt nothing. No pain, no anger, no nostalgia. Just a distant memory, like an old photograph kept in a drawer that's rarely opened. I felt a quiet surge of pride. Pride for the man I was back then, the one who had found the courage to leave, the one who refused to persist where there was no reciprocity. The following weekend, I took Lena and the girls to see our new city. We walked along the shore of Lake Michigan, played in Millennium Park, and had dinner in a small, cozy restaurant. The girls laughed loudly, their joy infectious. Lena looked at me with a quiet affection, an expression full of a deep, mutual gratitude for the life we had built. That night, while I was tucking them into bed, one of my daughters, Mia, looked at me with her serious, 6-year-old eyes. "Daddy," she asked, "are you happy?" I smiled. A full, genuine smile that reached every corner of my being. I answered her firmly, with more certainty than I had ever felt about anything in my life. "Yes, sweetie, more than I ever imagined I would be." A few days later, while I was making breakfast for the girls in the kitchen of our new home, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email. The sender's name made me pause. Glada. The email was simple. No drama, no pleas. She said she was okay, that she had followed my journey from afar, through industry news and mutual acquaintances. She said that despite everything, she wished me well. She told me she had divorced Marcus a few years ago. She wrote one sentence that seemed to hold the weight of a decade of regret. "I mistook need for love, and I spent a lot of time trying to forgive myself." She didn't ask to come back. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She just thanked me for moving on. I read the entire email in silence. Lena was in the other room, helping the girls get dressed. The sound of their laughter drifted into the kitchen. I didn't reply. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but because there was simply nothing more to say. That chapter belonged to another time, to another man. Life had taken its turns, and from the suffocating silence of a dead marriage, I had built an entire family full of truth, laughter, and light. And in that quiet kitchen, with the sun streaming through the window, I finally, fully understood. Rebirth doesn't bloom when you stop waiting for apologies from the past. It blooms when you start offering yourself peace in the present.